Production. I just want to acknowledge this amazing theatre, and Emma, the rest of the board, the people who worked so hard to build this museum. It'll be a lot of years before I start to take this for granted. It's a really incredible space. So, thank you to all of you who made this happen. My own father was a very creative man, but he worked in advertising, not in film. He wasn't a film buff per se. So when he would tell me about things in movies that had struck him, I remember them all, they landed with me, and I'm 53, so there was no home video around at the time these conversations started. So it would sometimes take me years to catch up with particular things, whether it's sort of watching Lawrence of Arabia and feeling thirsty when they're going through the desert, that I would get to experience later on in life. And some of those things, like the stereophonic sound of the birds in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, maybe weren't quite as dramatic for me as they had been for him when he first experienced them, or Laurence Olivier using the sound of a heartbeat to accompany the ghost in his Hamlet, things like that. But there's one moment that he told me about for years, told me the sort of significance of, that absolutely had the same impact on me. And that's a moment in the film you're about to see. I don't know how to handle spoilers with this kind of lecture, so maybe if I do this as I'm about to say something, those of you who haven't seen Shane can cover your ears, I don't know. But there's a moment in this film where Jack Palance shoots Elijah Cook Jr. and it's a moment that Sam Peckinpah then famously said, this is when things started to change. It's the first time that the decision by the filmmaker had been made to try and show the kinetic force of a gunshot, of what a bullet would do to a human being, to try and represent, almost metaphorically, the violence of that moment. And George Stevens referred to it as a Holocaust. He said, for our purposes in this film, a gunshot is a Holocaust. And he should know, because he was there at the liberation of Dachau and fearlessly filmed what was found there to be used as evidence at the Nazi trials in Nuremberg. And it would be very presumptuous for me or anyone really to sort of speculate as to what that would have meant to him, or even as a director, what change or change to the way you look at the world that would make. I don't know. But looking at the work, it's certainly the case that post his wartime service, the concerns of his films became more dramatic, more serious. And that's really the point at which my interest, or my absorbing of the influence of George Stevens as a filmmaker, really starts to take hold in his filmography. And so when George asked me to speak tonight, I thought about, well, why me? What's the influence of Shane, in particular, on my filmography? And what I first went to was the moment where I showed the great Alan Horn, then at Warner Brothers, the ending of The Dark Knight at script stage, and he took one look at it and said, "But it's Shane." Sorry, that is a spoiler too. To which I said, "Well, Alan, no one's going to know that, but movie critics and film buffs, and they love that shit." And I also said, and it worked for Shane, right? So, and Alan wasn't wrong. A lot of people called me out on it, but they seemed to take it in the spirit of homage in which it was intended. Similarly, when we came to shoot Oppenheimer in New Mexico and we had to build Los Alamos, my designer, Ruth de Jong, and myself, we were up there laying out stakes of how we were going to build the town, and all the time thinking about Shane and about the relationship of the town that was built there with the mountain range. It's a very, very difficult thing to try and incorporate landscape and weather and all of these elements into the frame in such a way that the audience is always aware of it. And it felt important to the story we were making. Just as I think it's very important to the story that George Stevens was telling in Shane, there's a relationship in this film between the landscape and what's going on in the story, and the pathetic fallacy of the weather and the dramatic events of the story that I think is as strong as any in films. And I gather, I mean, from what I've read in George's book about the making of it and so forth, I gather that there was a lot of time waiting for the weather to be right, incorporating particular changes. The moment I was referring to between Jack Palance and Elisha Cook Jr., if you look at what the weather is doing in that moment, the way the light's changing, it's a very, very radical approach to putting together a moment like that. And those are the kind of things that I felt, you know, were connections that I had made with this film and my work. But as I've thought about this screening and about talking about it, I realized that I think, for me, the influence of George Stevens, not so much consciously, but over time as I look at my own work and what I'm trying to do, and I look at what he achieved with this film, I think it comes back more to, I suppose, a sense of ethics, really. It connects really with a moment that I had when I was making a film called Insomnia with Al Pacino and Robin Williams and Hilary Swank. And in pre-production on that film, Al said to me, "Have you seen A Place in the Sun?" And I hadn't. And he said, "Okay, you should really watch it in relation to this film." And without getting into the detail of that, generally when a collaborator on a film is telling you to watch a prior movie or another filmmaker's film, it's usually something to do with a stylization, a technique, you know, those kind of things. But in that moment, very clearly, you know, it was to do with the ethics of the film, the worldview it presents. And that's where George Stevens sits in the canon. He's somebody who fully embraced the complexity of human life. The liberation of Dhaka that I was referring to in Mark Harris's incredible book, Five Came Back, and then also in the wonderful Netflix documentary made from it that's on Netflix now still, you'll hear George Stevens speaking with a lack of judgment that's shocking about these things that he recorded and that he saw. There's an acknowledgement in his tone of human frailty that I think when you look at his subsequent work, it suggests a worldview in which you're not dividing things into good and bad, black and white, right and wrong, and then pitting them against each other. You're embracing ethical structures in which good and bad are within us all and are intertwined. And what that's allowed him to do, and allows him to do in Shane, I think, is use the conventions of the Western and not subvert them and not play counterpoint to them, but allow the situations, the relatively simple situations, to live and breathe with an understanding of human nature, the dark and the light in human nature, in a very non-judgmental way. And if that sounds a bit abstract, I would point to the moment where Shane is teaching a young boy how to shoot, and mother comes upon this scene, and there's a discussion of violence there that many filmmakers have tried to emulate, myself included, and we all sort of wind up somehow being too didactic, too judgmental, trying to make too much of a point. I think the only time I've seen that moment almost as gracefully done as that is probably Peter Weir's Witness, the scene between Harrison Ford and Kelly McGillis, where the young boy, played by Lucas Haas, has discovered his gun, and they do their moment, their Shane moment, and I think they do it with great grace. And it is this lack of judgment, this understanding of human nature, and celebration, therefore, of human nature, that I think distinguishes this film. It looks at different types of violence, necessary violence, gratuitous violence, all types of different violence, and they're all portrayed within the film. And I think it was many, many years before any filmmaker really was able to tap into that. That sort of, is it a Western, is it a revisionist Western? There are plenty of arguments online about this film along those lines, and they speak to that essential thing that I think really wasn't, I think, until Clint Eastwood made his masterpiece Unforgiven, that we see a film that obeys the conventions of the genre, indeed embraces them, and yet has more to it, and yet is embracing of the contradictory human impulses that arise from the situations that are developed, and treats them with gravity and seriousness. All of which really is by way of saying that, you know, there are many Westerns, but there is only one Shane. Fortunately for us, there are two George Stevens. And I want to thank George for letting me speak tonight and introduce this film that I love so much, and I'm looking forward to watching it again now with you. And really one of the things is, as I sit and watch the film tonight, I'm going to be thinking about what I said and the interpretations I gave of this film and realizing they're completely wrong. But that's the mark of a great work of art. And, you know, 25 years, 50 years, 70 years, I mean, this film stands in its proper place in film history as an incredible touchstone and a source of inspiration and influence for filmmakers of my generation and generations to come. So George, thank you for asking me to be here, and I'll let you introduce the film. Thank you.